There we are. Good evening, everyone. Welcome
Hi.
to Tuesday Night Live Q&A. Moffat on Money with I'm Clay, joined by the gracious, lovely, kind, sweet, long-suffering, patient,
Creator
all
Shenanigans.
all-knowing E-Train. Good to see y'all. Good to
Hi.
be with y'all. Still feels a little weird after, he only missed a week. It just seemed a lot longer. And it's just kind of, to me, a little weird getting back in the groove. It just seems like I've been away. So, but good to be with y'all. Melissa,
I
Jane,
better
good
do
to
my
see
job.
y'all.
Happy Tuesday. Hiya.
Hi, happy Tuesday to everybody. Hope y'all have had a good day and are staying dry wherever you are. We're starting to get the rains from Debbie. I've got a couple of friends down in Charleston, and they say it has just been an absolute rain dump. So,
Yeah, I
I,
talked to my friend
I,
in Myrtle Beach today, and they said it was a mess.
yeah, I don't know what the flooding's like, but it's headed our way. I've It was a couple days ago, but I saw an estimate of roughly around 20 inches. Now I don't know if it's going to end up being that much, but nonetheless, it's going to be a lot of rain, a lot of flooding. I don't know if it'll start washing out roads like Florence did, but we'll see.
In case y'all don't live on a coast like ours and don't understand how all this works, if it rains 20 inches here and 20 inches further inland, all the rivers come straight down to the coast. So then there's just this flood of water on top of the rain that we already had. And it just creates a total flooding mess for days. It
Yeah,
is,
all of the
yeah,
creeks, all of the rivers, everything just blows up. So
and just comes right down to the coast. And it just, so 20 inches of rain could be 50 inches of water by the end
yeah,
of the day.
and it will last for days. It doesn't it doesn't run off and dissipate quickly. So that was
There's
really the
no,
problem with Florence. Florence wasn't a bad hurricane. It
mm-mm.
was just it came over us, parked, sat here for 3 days, and moving very slowly. And so between here and 150 miles around, rain just dumped. So that was the
Lumberton flooded, which is,
Kingston.
yeah, I mean, everything, Whiteville, and that's
Yeah,
off the coast. So when all that water was draining somewhere, it all went to the coast. And that's how Wilmington was such an island for so long.
yeah, and a lot of roads washed out.
Hmm.
So it made getting around the eastern part of the state just a mess. So we're hoping for better, but we'll see.
So I'm staying put where I am.
Yeah, Ellen is in one of our remote studios, so glad to have her with us, and glad the storm so far is not interrupting anything. Wouldn't be surprised if we lose power for a day or two, but we'll see.
Yeah, so Saturday, if we're not on, it's because one or both of us has lost power.
So, um,
Oh, and
Ben,
Jane, I'm not in a closet. I changed my background. I hope this is better.
apparently some people didn't like the idea that
I have that
Ellen
brick
was in a
wall.
little, yeah, Ellen was in a little closet or some space. So um, we try to accommodate.
It's actually a very, very, very large room. I just was trying to figure it all out on Saturday. It is Tuesday. Yeah, today's Tuesday. Sorry.
Yeah, my whole calendar's off too. I'm I'm about to get back in the swing of things. Obviously, school's about to start back up, so summer has gone by way too fast.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting day in the market. Interesting couple of days. Interesting week in the market. Getting some questions as to what the hell is going on. So we'll talk about that some tonight. We'll further address some issues with um, Bitcoin price has been bouncing all over the place. And we'll talk about UBI. Uniform basic income. A idea or a concept a number of people advocate. And well, we've got lab results on that. So we're going to take a look at one of the experiments and the results they
Uniform
found.
basic income.
Sorry. It was me. I forgot about a screen.
Ellen?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. All right.
Sorry.
Actually, I had some other reverb going on in my ears from my side. I thought it was yours.
Oh.
And just in case y'all are wondering or having any doubts,
We are professionals.
we are professionals. WAP. That started early in the show, year and a half ago or whatever. We had some technical difficulties for a number, several times in a row, and that just became, cliche. We are professionals.
We always have issues. It hasn't ended. It's just a different kind or different nature.
I like to think they're resolved a little bit quicker and better now. So anyway, that's tonight's agenda. And actually tonight, it's supposed to be a time where you can feel free to ask questions. There's a lot going on in the economy, in the markets. A lot going on with the weather, a lot going on with politics. Kamala announced her new running mate, Tim Walz. So what do y'all think of good old Tim?
I don't know anything about him.
Minnesota governor.
Okay.
So we'll be finding out a lot more about him, the next few days. Already a lot of, stuff coming out. So what do you think? What questions do you got? We'll be glad to try to handle any and all.
And if you want to ask what is happening with my 401k, what can I expect? How does this affect my retirement? All this crazy market stuff. Please go ahead, ask.
Yeah, and we're going to try to tonight go into a little bit more detail what's going on behind the scenes. Now, my goal is not to give you tons of technical information that will bore you to tears. But I want you to have enough background to try to understand a lot of the competing interests and influences that are impacting the market. Hopefully that helps you make a little bit better decisions for you and your family as to what to do. Makes you a little bit better informed, helps you ask better questions. So, tonight's a night for questions. Thought that, might be somewhat apropos. If I say something that doesn't make sense or gets too confusing, then please let me know. Jane, Google how he changed the flag of Minnesota. Yeah, he apparently wanted to make some of the Somali residents feel more at home, so he changed the flag to closer represent the flag of Somali, which I thought was fascinating.
Got to be kidding me.
No. Nice little YouTube video of it out.
And Melissa, I hear you. I have no idea. I've heard of them. I hear they're something that you're supposed to have.
Yeah, knowing Melissa, I'm going to take that as a little bit of a joke, just in case there are some new people watching. We've talked about 401ks a fair amount. 401k is just a retirement plan. So we'll just refer to it generically as that.
Yeah, some of us don't have those things. I think that's what Melissa is talking about. I don't either.
Yeah.
Sky is watching. She's having chat issues. Well, dag nabbit.
Well, I hope she gets it. Hey, Sky. I hope she gets it cleared up quickly. Sky is, one of the Sky, Melissa, Jane, all much beloved members of the family, people that have been with us for quite a while. And it really is a little family. So we are really pleased to see y'all and glad to have the newbies.
Yes.
Glad to have the replay crew. We have a lot of people that have had to move to replay crew because of changing hours and demands on their time. But some of you guys, we miss you, and hope that you can join us live sometimes.
And
Now,
I know that Joe Biden probably has some questions, so you got to get that chat thing worked out.
yeah, for the again, that's kind of an inside joke for the newbies. Sky has a Instagram page called
And a YouTube channel.
and a YouTube channel called Dogs Discussions. And her husband does a good imitation of Joe Biden. So anytime we talk about, Joe Biden making an appearance, Joe Biden, doing this, doing that, it probably is in reference to Sky's husband. Melissa, also, for those of you that love dogs, she has a fun Instagram page, Love Pug Circus, and a website, Love Pug Circus. She she is a servant to a couple of pugs, and they are part of the family as well. So we are a pet friendly channel. You will see a couple of beasts with Ellen on occasion. They're on the road, like I say. Sometimes they're in here with me. But yeah, we've even had nights where we have people send in pics of their pets, and so we can do kind of an online show and tell. We might need to do that again. That was a fun night.
I like the calendar idea.
Yeah, we talked about actually doing a calendar of people's pets dressed up, like nurses, firemen, kind of a sexy little pet calendar. I don't know. We had all sorts of ideas one night, and that was just one that stuck out to me. All right. Well, let's talk about the markets. I think hopefully everybody is somewhat aware that the chaos kind of started in Japan. We talked about the yen carry trade Saturday, a series of combination financial transactions that were made possible by the weak yen, the yen being Japan's currency, and Japan's very low interest rates. The way this worked was, a year and a half ago, you could borrow the yen at 1.5%, convert that into dollars, and put it in a 5% savings account. So you were paying 1.5%, you received 5%. A ton of people did that. A ton of investors, some hedge funds did that. But we're going to dig a little bit deeper. That's a no-go. Mr. Carolyn said, absolutely not.
Oh, Mr. Caroline would make a good little financial kitty cat.
He could do Amish.
He could do Amish. There you go.
He could go all Amish for us. Anyway, it would be fun. We really maybe ought to try to put together a calendar or something. So, I'll talk about the yen getting weaker, getting stronger. I hope everybody understands what I mean when I talk about the yen getting weaker. A currency getting weaker, the dollar getting weaker, the yen getting weaker, whatever. It simply means that currency purchases less of other goods, of other nations' goods, or other currencies. It takes more yen to purchase the same amount of dollars or goods. And that really is a way to describe inflation. A weakening currency, a weakening yen creates inflationary pressures because the cost of foreign goods imported into the country increases, and that spurs inflation. And therein lies the heart of the problem, inflation. If we look at...
I'm going to remind you real quick, Clay, about something that I mentioned earlier today about inflation and the printing of money.
Right. Let me hold off on that for a minute.
Okay.
if you look at this graph, this is a graph of the yen to the dollar. How many yen does it take to buy $1? And this goes back, you can't see the years. Let me see here. This goes back to the start of 2019. And you can tell the yen kind of hovered around 100, 110 yen to the dollar. And actually, if I had taken this further back, it would be relatively stable at that for the previous decade. So historically, the yen's, 100 yen to the dollar. Well, you can tell starting in 21, kind of after the COVID lockdown ended, that the yen starts depreciating. And the higher this goes, the more yen it takes to buy $1. So as you see this get higher, this is what we would describe as the yen weakening. So the yen got up to over 160 yen to the dollar. So for, Japanese consumer, they saw the value of their money lose 60% of its purchasing power in just a few years. That's pretty damn significant. So if that happened to you, you'd be desperate trying to improve your investment return. Hence the yen carry trade. Now, one reason why this, increased so much and increased so rapidly was you had investors driven to just offload the yen, to just sell the yen, get out of yen-denominated assets. And because of the inflation, the lower value. The reason for this is that Japan, after the COVID lockdowns, the Bank of Japan did not raise interest rates. Even as inflation started creeping in and rising, they didn't raise interest rates. Now, we criticize the Fed for being so slow to raise interest rates once inflation started picking up here. But they finally hiked rates, and they hiked them rapidly. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But the Bank of Japan didn't. They kept their rates the same for the past 4 years, only hiking them these past 3 months. They've had 2 hikes. The past 3 or 4 months. And their, rate went from 0 to 0.25. So still very, very low. But that hike in percentage terms was pretty huge. And the hike in terms of its impact on some of these carry trades. Now remember, carry trade. I take, for example, for the US investors, I would take dollars and I would convert them to yen. And then I would, let me back up. Let me just simplify this. Simple carry trade. I would borrow the yen. I would borrow yen, and that would cost me some interest. I would then take that yen, convert it to dollars, and invest those dollars in US stocks, US bonds. So if I borrowed yen, I would pay 1%. I could put it in a US savings account at 5%. I could put it in stocks. I could put it in US bonds, whatever I wanted. So that's the yen carry trade. Well, once the interest rate starts rising, that gap increases. Once the yen started falling, that means that I'm losing purchasing power in the dollar. I'm going to get fewer yen back for my dollar. So that also is an increase. So that's when you saw people rushing to start to close that carry trade position. So talk about the carry trade. I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, there was actually an explanation. It's 90 seconds on Twitter from a guy named Frank something. I don't have but it sort of gave all the graphics for it, saying, okay, this is what happens. You buy this, you do this, it's worth this is what happens. But if it goes up or the loss, then you end up like losing a crap ton of money. I
Yeah,
think
we talked to. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I wasn't here for the whole thing last time, so I don't know how deep you got into that.
Yeah, we talked about it last time, and we talked about how, a lot of the major investors who had yen carry trade positions were also leveraged.
Mm-hmm.
For every dollar they it put up, they would borrow 5, 10, maybe 20. So that leverage obviously increases their return. But if things start going against them, it magnifies their losses as well. So, but we talked about that a good bit Saturday.
Okay, sorry.
So the yen falling from 160 down, it dropped down to about 144, 143. Today it went back up to 145. So I'm not sure this renewed strength is going to hold. But keep in mind, the interest rate is tied to the value of the currency, because that's the rate you can expect to earn if you own that currency or holding that currency. Simplest example would be, like I say, putting it in a savings account and earning the domestic rate. Now, that desire for higher yield was desired by both American and Japanese investors, even Japanese individuals. And it led them to sell the yen, driving the number of yen to the dollar higher and encouraging investors to do more of that. The more they did it, the more profitable it was. The more they did it, the weaker the yen got. The weaker the yen gets, the more money they make, which encourages them to do more of it. So it's kind of a self-perpetuating cycle. And that's why you see some of these relatively steep rises here. And in terms of, currency movements, this is pretty damn significant. That's a hell of a lot of change over a relatively short period of time. Now, the thing is, there's really nothing new about this. It's been in the making for years, for decades. It's part of a relatively long-standing trend. Now, while the yen's decline has been relatively severe of late, like I say, the currency has been, weakening since 21.
You there?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think how I want to word some of this. The unwinding of this carry trade. A lot of people were talking about it, particularly Friday, Monday. And, a lot of people think it's over. Not. If you look at this, it took 3 years for this to build. And this is not going to be cleared out or leveled out in 2 days. The key point is that the complete unwinding will take some time. It's not a one-day phenomenon.
Hey, let me, if you don't mind, I'm
No,
going
go
to
ahead.
interrupt you. So the markets were down Friday. They were down Monday. Today they made a little comeback. Why?
Largely, well, Japan's market, and I was actually going to get to that later. So let me hold off on that question for a couple minutes.
Okay.
I will get to it, but let me just hold off for a couple minutes because I've got a couple of picks to show about that actually. But I want people to understand what's going on in the background.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, Japan has maintained rock bottom borrowing cost, and they've done this for 20 years. These 20 years are known as the lost decades in Japan because their economy has been so stagnant. It really hasn't experienced much growth or activity. Now, not only that, but the government in doing this kind of stimulus has greatly increased its debt. We fuss about the U.S. government having $35 trillion in debt. That's nearly 128% of GDP, which is getting close to third world nation status. Well, Japan's up at 225%, 230%. They absolutely blow us out of the water. Now, part of the difference is that Japan's a weird country financially. Japan is very cultural, I don't want to call them narcissistic, but they love their culture. It's a great culture, great people, very disciplined, very clean, very polite, great people. I'm not knocking them. But they don't have as much respect for cultures that are not Japanese. If you notice, there's an absence of Japanese students at American universities. We'll get students from all around the world, just not Japan.
They also have issues with lines. Standing in line.
What?
Lines.
Yeah, it's just a different culture, and they have different views. So they're not terribly respectful in some ways of gaijin. And that's okay. That doesn't bother me. I respect, what they do, how they do it. But financially, that makes them very unique because they can fund a lot of their own debt domestically. The U.S., we have to borrow tons from China, from Japan, from Europe, etc. Japan really doesn't. Japan funds most of it domestically. And so they've got a huge amount of government debt. Well, the problem is, particularly when they have inflation, and particularly when their yen is getting weaker, is they can't afford to hike interest rates, which would solve both of those problems or address somewhat both of those problems. They can't hike interest rates because the government can't afford the increase in interest expense. You go from 0.1 to 0.2, that's still a terribly low interest rate, but it doubles your interest expense.
Well, the U.S. can't afford it either, can we?
Yeah, we're going to spend probably $1.7 trillion on interest expense this year. That'll be 30 to 40% of all income taxes collected.
So if we hike the rates again, we're just hurting ourselves.
Well, it's a catch-22. The way to tame inflation is to quit printing so much money and make money more valuable, hiking rates.
Now can we talk about the thing? When the U.S., the U.S. prints money, right? We're going to print a whole bunch of money. And then the government will invest those in, bonds, pretty much. And they get the full value of that money at the time.
The government doesn't invest it in bonds, though. They spend it
on
goods and services.
Okay, regardless.
Yeah.
They end up, they get the full value of the dollar at the time that it was printed. Now, once they pay for those and put that money into the system, that's when we all get screwed because our dollars are now worth less. But at the time it was printed and they spent the money, it was worth what it was at that time. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Inflation is just simply more money chasing the same amount of goods. So if you increase the level of money with increasing the amount of goods produced, then, inflation should be around 0%. That's obviously almost impossible to do equally, but nonetheless. But government, when it prints money, it gets to spend it without taking it out of circulation. So they're adding to the money supply. But that impact of it being added to the money supply hasn't been felt yet. So when they take the money that they print and spend it, they get it at the lower value. Once that money is spent and now is out and circulating, that's when it starts creating the inflation or the additional inflation or hiking inflation.
When they spend it, they get at the higher value, correct?
Right. The government
You
is
said
able to
lower.
purchase at a lower cost
Lower cost.
in inflationary environments. So that's one advantage to government, having inflation, while some people don't mind inflation. Now, if you're poor or middle class, inflation can be devastating to you. To a government official, it can be somewhat beneficial because they receive greater value for it than you do once you finally receive it. And if you've got a job, it may take you a year to get an inflation raise. Whereas government, spent that money a year before, 11 months before, 10 months before, that created the inflation you're finally getting the raise for. So that's one way that governments kind of look at debt and inflation. They see it as somewhat of an advantage. Melissa's on a roll tonight. What's an inflation raise?
Clay wants to do the same thing.
Yeah. But inflation, if you're, like I say, if you're, poor, middle class, inflation screws you over. If you're one of the, people in power, you can use it to your advantage because you can purchase more things. You can hand out more money to people, earning their vote, their loyalty, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of an issue. So I think that's what Ellen, wanted to, or was asking earlier.
No, I just wanted you to say something about it so that people realize that inflation comes after the government has already printed the money and gotten their value out of it, and then we get screwed, basically.
All right, back to Japan. Japan simply, shucking this down to the cob, Japan's screwed. Their inflation rate is over 3%, 3.2 or whatever, which is high for them. But hiking interest rates to try to tamp it back down, well, you saw their market's reaction. It just created chaos. They had a 10-year Bank of Japan bond issue yesterday. It was a horrible auction. Nobody wanted it. The BOJ, who just came out the week prior and said, we're hiking rates and we're going to quit printing so much money. We're going to quit buying so many government bonds. Well, 3 days later, the Bank of Japan had to swallow hard and buy 50% of this bond issue after saying they would cut back on bond purchases. The yield on it, this is cool, the yield on it stopped out at 0.95%, not even 1%. Why does nobody want Japanese debt? 0.95%. To give you a comparable rate, the U.S. 10-year right now is about 3.89%, 3.9%, which I think is relatively low. But nonetheless, it's almost 4 times what Japan's rate is. So Japan's really screwed. They're having to print money to fund government, which will create more inflation. They're having to print money to try to buy the bonds that the government is issuing to fund the government. But they can't hike rates to try to tamp down inflation created by all the money printing. So they've got the perfect kind of catch-22 in economics or finance. They printed so much money, they borrowed so much money, they're paying as much interest as they can afford, and it's just going to feed on itself. They can't afford to do, don't have the ability to do anything different. Now, in terms of the Japanese stock market, what has this hike in interest rate and the unwinding of the carry trade done? Well, this goes back about a year, and you can tell that, for the first part of the year, there was some, decent upward pressure. And then the bank announced the hike, and you see the unwinding of the carry trade. This is a 2-day event. They lost 25% of the value of this index. This is the Topix index, the Tokyo Stock Exchange index. They lost 25% of the value in 2 days. Well, yesterday, the market's just about to open over there at 8 p.m. Yesterday, they gained back 10%. Now, I've been in the markets for 40 years. This is not a healthy market. You don't see a market drop 10%, 12%, then up 10%. No. So what drove this up 10%? My guess, and I don't have any firm proof other than an extremely unusual visual, is that the central bank of Japan. This is intervention. This is bank intervention. Central bank printing money and buying Japanese stocks in order to force the market back up and to try to calm the fears. Well, what did they actually contribute to? They bought a day's peace in the market, but what did they contribute to? More inflation. Something's got to give. You can't continue this kind of shell game forever. Sooner or later, something's going to break. And the more they do it, the longer they carry it out, the harder that break is going to be. My opinion. The BOJ is desperate to stop the panic. And they're even encouraging Japanese investors to buy Japanese bonds to try to keep the interest rate low so they don't have to keep buying them. Well, we saw how well that worked yesterday. At 0.95% for 10 years, when inflation is 3 or 4%, plus you've got to pay taxes on the interest received. Who wants that? That's a negative yield. You're guaranteeing yourself that every year your money will purchase less and less and less. Jane, I wonder if Shinzo Abe death paved the way for what we're seeing now. They've been doing this since the 90s. This started in the 90s. So, I think it goes further back than Abe. But Japan's screwed. Now, so that gives you a little bit better background as to what's going on in Japan. What does that mean immediately? I can't say is the BOJ going to intervene again tomorrow to force the market up another 10%? I don't know. My crystal ball is not perfect. I can't tell you the time. I can't tell you when, but I can tell you if they keep this up, what's going to happen. It's going to be ugly. Now, another thing that you need to understand is that about a year and a half ago in this country, our government shifted all of its borrowing to T-bills. Now, remember, T-bills have a maturity. It's under a year, but for years we've only been going out 6 months. So a maturity under 6 months, very, very short-term borrowing. And rates have been very low. You can borrow 10 years for 3.8%. Right now, T-bills are 5.25. For the past 2 or 3 years, the 10-year bond, the 20-year bond have been 150 to 300 basis points lower. Basis points. There's 100 basis points in 1%. So 150 basis points is 1.5%. 300 basis points is 3%. So you could borrow for 10 years instead of 6 months and save 150 basis points, 1.5% a year in interest payment. So why aren't we doing that? That doesn't make financial sense why the government would shift everything to borrowing in the short term. It doesn't make financial sense. But it does make some political sense. Political sense. Politics. In Washington, follow the money. Always, always follow the money. And when something screwy is going on with the money, there's 99.9% of the time only one explanation: politics. So what advantage is there to offering all T-bills instead of doing the normal distribution of maturities? Well, it improves liquidity prior to the election. I mean, we've known for a year, year and a half, 2 years that the economy was starting to slow down and have some issues. It was relatively stagnant. Now, the Fed says it doesn't pay attention to the stock market, close attention to the stock market, but it does. And liquidity is huge in the markets. So let me digress here for just a second and talk about the Fed's relationship to the stock markets, the bond markets. In particular, I'm going to talk about what's come to be known as the Bernanke put, the Yellen put, and now maybe the Powell put. And you ask, what is this put? You may hear people on financial channels talk about the Bernanke put, the Yellen put. What are they talking about? What is this put? Well, a put in finance is the right to sell an asset at a contractual price, regardless of what's going on in the market. A put gives me the right to sell Apple stock at $100 anytime over the next 6 months. Even if Apple drops to $1, I can still sell it at that $100 contractually. So a put is a guarantee of value, which becomes increasingly valuable as that value drops. Well, it's been kind of turned, that aspect of it has been turned to provide a description of the Fed chairman's cutting rates and printing more money to stimulate the economy, aka the market stumbled, the stock market stumbled. Now, Bernanke refined it to an art form, taking rates near zero and cranking up the printers. He didn't just lower rates. He actually started printing tons of money to buy trillions in treasury bonds and mortgage-backed pools, mortgages. This was known as quantitative easing. So he would go out in the markets and literally buy bonds, treasury agency, or mortgages. And this was the process known as quantitative easing, or as I describe it, free money. The primary banks, the big banks, the Federal Reserve cannot buy at the treasury auctions. It's barred by law. So what they would do is the primary banks, the large banks, Citi, BOA, Chase, whatever, buy treasuries at auction. Then they would turn around and sell them to the Fed for a little markup. So it was, free money. And they just keep churning this over and over. It was extremely profitable to them And what would they do with this money? Well, they would take it and invest it in the market. So not only was the Fed consuming a lot of what the Treasury was producing, it was also printing money to go out and into the market and buy mortgages to drive down the mortgage rates. You remember mortgage rates got down to 2.5%. That's not a market rate. Nobody wants in their right mind wants to lend money at 30 years at 2.5%, because you lose 40% of that in taxes, and then inflation's 3, 4, 5% a year. Again, you're just guaranteeing yourself a loss. But the Fed forced those rates down that low. It was stupid, absolutely stupid. But that kind of is what got us in the mess we're in now. You know, housing prices soared, absolutely blew up. Why? Because there was so much money to buy houses with. And, you know, the rates were so low. Real estate, commercial real estate, everything boomed because money was cheap. And that's created the problem we've got today. You've got millions locked in a 2.5 or 3% mortgage that they can't afford to get out of. They can't sell their house, buy another one, and pay a 7% mortgage. So it created the housing bubble, locked millions into a mortgage they can't afford to get out of, greatly to the inability of young people to buy their own starter house because prices are so high. Nobody is willing to sell their houses, so supply is very restricted. Supply is way down. Supply and demand always determines price. So another, I guess, aspect to this manipulating of the markets that the Fed engaged in for the past decade was that it focuses more investment in financial services, because, you know, banks and financial industries who, you know, can borrow at basically 0%, take that money and put it in safe investments, treasuries or whatever, 2, 3, 4, 5%, and keep that spread. This is free money. And risk-free profits are always attractive to investors, much more so than investing in risky industries like manufacturing or agriculture, whatever. So there was a lot of people who shifted their investments to finance. That's why all the banks did so well, and why another reason why manufacturing kind of petered out in this country. So, all right, QE. Bernanke stated in 2013 that he wanted to end QE. His idea was it was about time. I mean, the markets had doubled in a couple of years. Hell of a good run. So it was his idea that markets should stand on their own 2 feet. It was time. So he stated he was going to cut and quit QE. Well, long story short, the markets fell. Bernanke relented, and that started almost an endless cycle of QE stopping, markets falling, QE stopping, markets falling. Until Trump became president, they finally were able to stop for a couple of years. Markets held up okay, did all right. And then COVID hit, and bam, they're back to, you know, some form of QE. Now, Powell saw an opportunity to try to reverse that. Powell has always hated QE. I do love him for that. So he tried to reverse it for a year, but the banking crisis hit. You remember SVB, First Republic, going tits up. The economy slowed, and so he's had to put a pause on reversing some of that. He hasn't quite started printing and cutting rates, but there's a lot of pressure on him to do so. And the market would love it. The market's desperate for it. I remember in 2009, I was still in cash because 8 or 9 or 10 banks were closing a month. The economy was moribund, wasn't doing anything, and I thought the risk was just still too high. In 2009, 2010. But the stock market started taking off, and I was like, how the hell? Nobody's generating any cash or profits. And then I finally figured out QE. The Fed was the 800-pound gorilla in the room. So as long as the Fed was pushing out free money, the markets are going up. It doesn't matter how bad or stagnant the economy is. And that's still my tone. I hope the Fed will quit manipulating the markets because I think it creates a lot of other problems. But ultimately, if the Fed starts QE again, announces another QE program, sell all you have and invest it in the stock market. So liquidity. All right. Got a little background on liquidity and the Fed. Now, the Fed, this is a graph of the Fed balance sheet showing, going back to the beginning of 2020. And then here's COVID. You had several different stimulus plans hit late 20. And then you had the ongoing American Relief Act that was paying outrageous amounts every month to keep people at home not working. And this is really when inflation started kicking off. So you see the Fed balance sheet went from, 3.8 trillion to 9 trillion just in a couple of years. More than doubled in a couple of years. Massive increase. Now, remember I said Powell tried reducing it? Well, this is what Powell's been doing. He's been letting these assets roll off and not replacing them. So shrinking the Fed's balance sheet. Well, if you look at this a little bit closer, it's pretty much flattened out. It's no longer dropping. And that's why I say he's pausing. Now, the funding switch to T-bills. This is part and parcel of how the Fed manipulates and manages the money supply, which is its charge. Somebody's got to do it. A lot of people hate the Fed. Fed should be, banned or closed or whatever. And I understand the dislike of the Fed. I've not been a huge fan of theirs. But the idea of the Fed is to have an independent group of people managing the money supply rather than having politicians in DC do it. Those are your two choices, as far as I know. One of them's going to do it. One or the other is going to do it. So who do you have do it? Now, my criticism of the Fed is all of them are academics. All of them are ivory tower academics. None of them have actually worked lending money or, in a real bank. And so, I would make some significant changes in the Fed. Story for another night. Don't get me kicked off on that. But the Fed has come in handy several times, particularly in 9/11, particularly during the subprime crisis, those kind of things. Well, even during this time, when the Fed was shrinking the balance sheet, this is about the time the Treasury started shifting to issuing all T-bills to try to improve liquidity. Well, the Fed also was trying to improve liquidity and do it in a way that they hoped wouldn't create much to inflation. They were using what's called reverse repos. And here you can see, reverse repos went from practically zero to over $2.4 trillion. That's daily. So massive amount of currency is being pumped into the economy in this time. Again, these things ultimately contributed to inflation rising to 9%. And you can see they have tapered it off greatly. But the problem is there was a dearth of liquidity in the markets, particularly with banks. So it's a fine line between having sufficient liquidity and overpumping the market. Well, the Fed was accommodative, obviously, and combined with Congress spending like there's no tomorrow, you've had a lot of money going out, but liquidity has kind of dried up recently this past year. You can see here that the Fed has been tapering the reverse repos and the levels dropped significantly. It's continuing to drop, which brings us to kind of the interesting point. ATI. ATI. ATI is short for Activist Treasury Issuance. This is a paper just written, published at the end of July by Roubini and Moran. Their point is that the shift in the Treasury issuance, they studied why would the Treasury shift issuance? Relatively significant event. And they state by adjusting the maturity profile, shifting to shorter maturities, the Treasury is dynamically managing financial conditions and through them the economy. So these two economists are basically arguing that they are usurping core functions of the Federal Reserve. They're competing with the Federal Reserve to manage or influence monetary policy. They say by manipulating the amount of interest rate risk owned by investors, ATI works through the same channels as the Fed's quantitative easing programs. They estimate the ATI has reduced 10-year Treasury yields by roughly 25 basis points over the last year. This is equivalent to economic stimulus similar to a 1% cut in the Fed funds rate. So Roubini and Morel's point is that this is counteracting the Fed's interest rate hikes. ATI has interdicted the Fed's attempt to restrain the economy, which helps explains why inflation has been persistent, why it hasn't died off yet, and why there has been, almost no upward growth surprises over the past year. Now, our beloved Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen denied this is the reason. But she offered no other reason for the shift. So what's going to happen? Well, looking at the charts, this is just the last 3 days in the Dow. You see the second, and then we saw Monday, big drop, and then today. You see it had a nice run up, and then it kind of tailed off by the end. The euphoria over the day's rise has pretty much faded. And there are certain realities that still exist. You've got the Fed trying to stimulate the economy. ATI is just one way. But pumping money does create some demand. It, I guess, creates a certain illusion that the economy is better than it actually is, but it can also be acting to keep inflation higher and may spark it again. Keep in mind, as we talked about earlier, the government doesn't mind inflation. It accrues wealth to them. The government gets richer as you get poorer. So they get to print and purchase at current values. They are, so to speak, at war with the Federal Reserve, who's trying to tame inflation. They render some of the Fed's steps ineffective and have prolonged them. Now, I really don't want you to, you know, pay a whole lot of attention to this, but I wanted to put it up just to kind of back up what I'm going to tell you. You know, a lot of people are talking about there's a need for a Fed cut, an emergency rate cut. Obviously, to the Fed, this would appear somewhat political due to the timing. But I think the Fed's real fear is that it will likely rekindle inflation if they start cutting, which will cause the Fed to have to hike again. And the Fed, this is one of the Fed's favorite indexes. It's PPI, Purchaser Price Index, less food and energy. This is known as core PPI. And this is one of the Fed's favorite numbers to follow. And one thing they look at that most people don't is moving average. And if you look here, the percentage change for the last 3 months, if you take those, sum them up, divide by 3, that 3-month moving average is 4.9%, nearly 5%. And that is a pretty decent increase over what it has been the previous 6 months. So there are some signs that inflation is starting to increase again. It's a feature or a bug. You know, is this by design? You know, I started thinking, I saw somebody mention, I don't know who, but I saw somebody mention if we measured inflation and unemployment the same way we did in the 70s and the 80s, it would be higher than most any year in those decades. I think it would be higher than every year in the 70s. Now, 1980, it got up to a combined 20. The misery index, you take the unemployment rate and add the inflation rate, the misery index. It got up to 20 in 1980. So excluding that year, I think today's rate, if CPI and if unemployment were calculated the same way they were in the 80s, it would be high. My estimate would be somewhere between 13 and 16%. So is this a feature or is this a bug? Unemployment is rising. Home starts are dying. Commercial real estate is getting clobbered. You know, and people are starting to lose their jobs. So what happens to home prices when people lose their jobs, even if they have a 2.5% mortgage? If prices go down and down a lot, what are the implications for the economy? Does that sound familiar? And there's I don't know, 100, 150,000 Americans who 4 or 5 years ago took out ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages. You remember in the subprime crisis years, one of the big problems was so many people had ARMs and their rates went from 1% to 5, 6, 7%, and they couldn't afford the mortgage. Does that sound familiar? We're looking at that same thing for 100,000, 150,000 Americans. Their loans will reprice this year. Is it a feature? Is it a bug? I don't know. But, you know, when I talk about there still are some practical realities out there that are a problem, despite, you know, whatever euphoria this morning brought around. You know, I see people running around going, all is well, all is well, all is well. And I just kind of have to shake my head. Now, again, my crystal ball is no better than anybody else's. I'm not saying I'm a prophet and this is handed down by the Almighty himself, and this is exactly what's going to happen at this point in time. I'm just telling you there are certain very, very serious structural issues out there. That's not an opinion. I'm telling you that Warren Buffett is holding the highest cash position he's ever held. Peter Druckenmiller is holding the highest cash position he's ever held. These are the two best investors over the past 30 years. So, even if you think I'm, maybe I've been sipping a little bit too much scotch or whatever, I'm okay with that. I'm cool with that. But, there's some things out there that you ought to consider and be careful of. We've almost set up a system where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So, any questions? I know that's, kind of a lot, but I'm trying to give you some of the background of what people are seeing, saying, thinking, doing behind the scenes. It'd be easy for me to say, hey, the market has corrections and bounces, go ahead and buy. And if you for some people, I probably still would recommend that. I talked about my student who started investing $50 a month this past spring. Proud as hell of her. Absolutely proud as hell of her. And for her, I would say keep doing that $50 a month. But if you've got retirement in 10 or 15 years or sooner, obviously, or if you have a sizable amount of money and you don't want to risk a 20 or 30% drop. Right now the treasury bills, the markets are paying 5%. That's not a bad, very low risk return for a few months. It sure as hell beats, a 20 or 30% drop if that's what we're kind of, setting up for, which my opinion is that's a very real possibility. And I'm obviously at the age where I'm cautious about risk. I always have been. I've always tried to avoid the severe downturns. My worst year up until now has been a 0.2% loss in 2000 when you had the dot-com bubble. During the subprime crisis, I had some shorts. I had some VIX shorts. I was largely in cash once Bear Stearns and Countrywide failed, etc. So I kind of netted out to a low positive then. But avoiding those big downside risk. That's my encouragement. Any thoughts, comments? All right, let me shift to Bitcoin, the well-known, much-loved Bitcoin. I've had several people email me and say, do you still think Bitcoin is all that? And, what's the old cliche? It's all that. And I can't even think of the cliche. Anyway, you get the idea. Well, we've seen Bitcoin crash a little bit.
A bag of chips.
A bag of chips. Thank you. You were missed. Is she back? Is she not back? Is she just a voice in the darkness? I have no idea what the hell she's doing. Anyway, we still love her. The crash in Bitcoin. Well, good old Bitcoin. This is the last 3 days. I probably should have had a little bit longer. Sorry. This goes back to July. I should have had a little bit longer view, but this will work. Bitcoin's had a couple of rough months, so to speak. It's had a couple of severe drops. A month or two ago, it was brought on by Grayscale, having to sell a bunch of Bitcoin. Grayscale had to sell millions. Grayscale had a Bitcoin ETF. They had to sell millions in Bitcoin, about 300,000 coins, due to bankruptcy settlements from the well-known, much-loved FTX. Yep, Sam strikes again. So, like I say, they had to sell over 300,000 Bitcoin. That's a hell of a bump, hell of a supply dump. Well, that finally passed and Bitcoin bounced on up to about 70. And then, it's had, some fluctuations. Well, part of this bump on the 28th, 29th of July was because Trump said that if he wins office, he is going to create a Bitcoin reserve. The US Treasury is holding some, or was holding some repossessed Bitcoin from the Silk Road deal. That was kind of a drug smuggling thing, so they seized the coin. And so Bitcoin, rallied a little bit and then, stabilized some and then it started to drop and has dropped severely. Well, we can thank and, give proper credit to Yellen, Biden, Harris. Let's give them, their proper kudos. You saw how Trump would say he's going to create a reserve. Well, and that cheered a lot of people, particularly the little holders, HOLD, HODL, hold on for dear life. Well, that was 2 weeks ago. At the end of last week, the Treasury moved $2 billion in these Silk Roads seized Bitcoin to 3 other wallets. They basically sold them to at least 3 other wallets. After selling them, after Trump promised to use these coins to establish a Bitcoin reserve. So there you go. That's what dumping $2 billion in Bitcoin looks like over a few days. Probably where they found that other 300 million that they could send to Ukraine. So I just saw a Ukrainian oligarch today came out and was talking about the kickbacks paid to several congressmen and senators for, in return for the funding to Ukraine. I don't know if there's any merit to it or what. It wouldn't terribly shock me, honestly. So if we can get the government to quit working against Bitcoin owners, you can tell it's already bounced back. It actually dipped down from 75 down to about 49, 48, 49. It has since bounced back in a day or two to 57. So Bitcoin's going to be okay. But this is just a massive dump. So people ask me, why did it crash so much? Well, thank your government. That's what a Bitcoin dump looks like. Questions? All right, got a few things that are, maybe a little bit in the trivia area, but I thought they were kind of interesting. Housing inventory in Florida has just hit the highest level in 7 years. It's up 70% from last year. 70% in 1 year. And we kind of talked about this was happening because nobody can get homeowners insurance down there, so they're being forced to sell. Insurance companies are just backed out. And of course, this latest hurricane won't help any. And the season's not even over yet. But that's up 70% in a year. That's a nice jump. Anybody, want some real estate in Florida for cheap? You're probably about to have some opportunities. This is one thing I stole from Oh, geez. Antony. Yeah, real Antony. It was just a nice little clean graph, and I thought it was really interesting. This is all the jobs created, quote unquote, last year. The administration likes to talk about the jobs it created. Well, if you notice, the top two categories, healthcare and government, those two categories alone account for more than half of all the jobs created. And they're still, well, we'll just go with this. Those account for more than half of all the jobs created. And keep in mind, healthcare, who is by far the largest payer of healthcare? Medicare, Medicaid, government employees, VA. You guessed it, government. So you've got government and government. This third category doesn't get enough credit, leisure and hospitality. What is leisure and hospitality? Can anybody tell me? What kind of jobs are those? The vast majority of them. I mean, some months it's 99% of them. What are the vast majority of leisure and hospitality jobs? Anybody ever worked as a waiter or a waitress or a bartender? These are all part-time jobs. Part-time jobs. So if you add the government jobs and the part-time jobs, that accounts for almost 3/4 of all the jobs created last year. Does that sound like a great economy to you? I'm a little cautious. Anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting. The last thing that I've got is UBI. UBI, Uniform Basic Income, Universal Basic Income. And this is the idea of just paying everybody a fixed amount of money, just kind of some minimum amount of money. And the idea is that it's supposed to ease your life, make everybody happier, help them, pursue activities they want or need to pursue that would be beneficial to them, beneficial to society. Well, there was a paper published in July, and haven't seen much on it at all, but I thought it was fascinating. This paper had the results from the largest controlled experiment in universal basic income ever done. It was funded by the founders of ChatGPT, putting their money to good use. So they had a control group of 1,000 families that didn't get the UBI. They had 1,100 households that did. And these were random households. Some of them were rural, some of them were suburban, some of them were inner city. And they did it for 3 years. So each household that was selected in the UBI group, two different groups, one without UBI, one with UBI, received $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year. And they wanted to see what the effect was, if it was really a positive effect on these families. Well, the results came out, or modestly interesting. The families on UBI, even with receiving $12,000 additional dollars a year to whatever jobs they had, they ended up earning $1,500 a year less than the control group. For every dollar in UBI received, net family income dropped 21 cents. That's fascinating. Participants, well, they stayed unemployed longer than those without UBI. Those who received worked less and had no substantive changes in unemployment. I think this is the most critical point. Recipients did little to improve their education or job skills. So what does that say about your future or society's future if UBI is started? Does that kind of remind you of you'll own nothing and like it? You won't need to own your house. You won't need to own a car. You'll eat less meat because you will be motivated to do nothing. You won't care about improving your education. You won't care about improving your life. And to me, that's despicable. I think that's a big part of the problem in the inner cities is we have removed hope of a better future. We've removed personal rewards. People have nothing to be proud of. They have no accomplishments. You know, people may say my greatest accomplishment isn't my job or my work. And I understand that. I get that. You know, having, been able to lay claim to making the most beautiful babies in the world, I understand what my greatest achievement is. But I'm also proud of what I do in my job and work and what I've done in my career, what I've done in, my community, whatever. A lot of this fades with UBI, apparently. UBI recipients also had higher rates of disability in an effort to limit the work they could do. How many saw that coming? Fascinating results. And this was a 3-year study, 1,100 families getting $1,000 a month. Melissa, GB wants more meat. It's good for him. And I'm pretty damn sure as long as you're drawing breath, he will have more meat. So, UBI, what do you think? Jobs, what do you think? Yen carry trade, what do you think? Now I'm going to shut up and give y'all a chance to gab. We also got a few other selections on the movies. I didn't get a whole lot of feedback from y'all. So I'm just going to put up a poll. I want less jobs and more money. I completely understand. And you're not alone. We unfortunately have a type economy where we're setting records with the number of people working 2 or more full-time jobs. Not to mention, all the people working full-time job or multiple part-time jobs, whatever. People that say, well, that, the economy is good, the GDP is great, all is well. I don't understand. I don't get it. I don't see it. Anyway. But yes, my hope and prayer for you is less jobs and more money, that green meat may get more meat. So, Ellen, are you there?
I'm here.
Well, pop on. You've got 2 different logins.
I'm aware of that as well.
Yeah, I was sitting there going, which one is real? Didn't know whether I was seeing cross-eyed or not.
No, I had to get on my my iPad.
That's okay. Yeah, Melissa, hopefully soon. I don't know exactly what your schedule is, but I know it's a bunch. So, and that just makes me more appreciative that you take the time out to join us here on the show. It really does. I thank you. We do love seeing you. Love having you. So, anybody else have anything? I was just sitting here looking, trying to make sure I didn't miss any questions. New puppy you can dress up, but the cat, no way. Going back to the calendar. And we seriously need to do that. I'll talk to Ellen and see if we can't get maybe something started on that. We'll find somebody who, will take pictures and print a calendar. But I think that'd just be cute as hell, personally. It'd just be a fun little thing to do. And we can throw it up on the store. Also, like take the time to just ask everybody to hit like and subscribe, if you will, do the YouTubey things. If you're watching some of the prior videos, we talk about a lot of, I would say, green issues or sustainable issues, not in the, typical environmental sense, but just in terms of getting out in nature, maybe a little homesteading, maybe a little gardening, maybe eating healthier, whatever. So we also have a store. There's a link on YouTube at the bottom of the description. If you have questions or comments, if you will, please just email me, moffatonmoney@gmail.com, or DM me on Twitter. Give me a follow on Twitter.
Yeah, and the solar cooking video got yeeted. So I've got to redo that one and get that up. And all of these solar cooking supplies and some of the foods we made are in the store.
Yeah, we had a video on solar cooking, and it was the night that Trump was being assassinated. And so, as something really interesting, obviously there was a lot of stories, rumors, information coming out. As something interesting was being revealed, we would mention it or throw it up on the channel. And we don't know what, but we think something about it, all that caused that show to get yeeted. So it was removed. So we're going to go back, clean out all of that, and try to repost it and see if that'll pass muster, so that we don't offend the YouTube gods.
Yeah, it's just a lot of editing to do.
Yeah. And it'll probably be a little jumpy because of that editing, but it's the best thing we can do. Tried to appeal to YouTube, and they didn't even consider it. Wouldn't even talk to us. So they've yeeted several of our videos, and it's cost us some hours, which is a problem. Kind of irritating. But, beyond my influence, believe it or not.
They do it on purpose. That's my opinion.
I can't argue that. Is that Chunkers I hear in the background?
I got the German Shepherd and, of course, the Toulouse and Chunk barking.
All three of them. Yeah. Ellen is running a home for homeless dogs. So if y'all have any other dogs y'all want to contribute or throw into the party there, y'all just put a postage stamp on their ass and send them to her.
Funny, haha.
I thought it was kind of cute. All right. The top 5 movies that I'm going to put in the poll: Field of Dreams, Forrest Gump, Princess Bride, Funny Girl, and Some Like It Hot. Those are the only ones I got votes for.
No. You didn't get Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium? No?
Oh, you never sent in your vote.
I didn't know I was allowed to vote.
I might have to include that one because she's got some what do I say? I was going to say she's got some weight to throw around, but I didn't figure that would come out well. She's got some influence. How's that? So we'll include that one.
Well, Sky asked for a happy movie, and that one's pretty darn happy after it's sad.
I think they're all happy, aren't they?
I'm not sure. I haven't seen some of them in a long time.
Princess Bride, Forrest Gump, Field of Dreams. Some Like It Hot. That's an old Marilyn Monroe movie. So, and Melissa, our Hollywood expert, they're all solid choices. So I'll take that as a good thing. Will anybody else have anything?
The reason I suggested Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium is because I'm kind of a 5-year-old at heart, and it's magical, and I love the magical things.
What is it now, Mr.
Megorium's, Magoriums, Wonder Emporium.
Got it. Starring Dustin Hoffman, Natalie Portman, Jason Bateman.
Jason Bateman, yeah.
Yeah. A few other people that look semi-familiar, but I don't really know the names or ring a bell. So, all right. Well, that'll be one of them. We'll throw that one. We'll throw that one in.
A great line
for all of our 5-year-olds at heart.
Yes. A great line was he was saying that he found an Italian shoemaker and he bought enough to last his entire life. And she's like, what? He's like, this is my last pair.
Fair enough. I will get that poll up probably tonight. And then we'll leave it up for a week, try to collect votes, and then schedule the book club meeting and have some fun with that.
You mean the movie club?
Movie club. Yeah. Sorry. Movie, book club, whatever. And for those of you who are not familiar, you know, little family here, we have a, once every month and a half, we'll have a movie club, or has been a book club. We've switched to movies because it just seems to be easier for everybody to watch a movie. And we'll just get together on Zoom and everybody just, you know, kind of talks. It's a good way to meet people, to get to know people, and to learn some different perspectives, ideas, perceptions, interpretations. It's just kind of a fun, easygoing little night. So hope you will, if you haven't, hope you will join us for the next one. I think it'll be fun. Got some good choices. Had several others, but just didn't get the votes. And if your fave didn't make it this month in the top, 5, then try it again next month and rally support for it. You can do that. You can plug your favorite. You can wax poetic about it. You can do a little karaoke number. Email it to me. I'll put it on and advocate for your favorite the best way you can.
You can get your friends to go to the channel and vote for it.
Absolutely. That counts too, even though I like my idea better. I think the little karaoke thing would be a great way to advocate for it.
Depends on your voice.
All righty then. Well, that's all I have got for the night. We're a little short of our usual, 2 hours. I feel like I've just kind of cut off y'all's, questions or something. So I'm going to get a complex about that, but I seriously hope that I haven't. Some of this is not your normal in terms of conversation, nightly conversation. But when I get several questions, what's going on in the market? I mean, everybody knows it's chaotic, but why is it chaotic? And so that's kind of what I tried to answer tonight. Give you a little bit better information on what all's going on behind the scenes and what some of the issues are, how they are going to be decided, how they are going to be shaken out. That kind of remains to be seen, but simple awareness that I exist, I believe, gives you some advantage. Hopefully it'll give you something to stew on and cogitate on, and maybe help you ask better questions, going forward, as far as, decisions you have to make with your life, your investments, etc., your financial situation, understanding more of what's going on in the world in the financial markets. Yeah, I love the topic. The financial markets. I love finance. Obviously, I'm in it. I do it, have done it my whole life. And I hope to try to, be able to shuck it down to a cob so that it makes some sense to you. Not that it all will be immediately understandable or remembered or whatever, but that hopefully over time you'll feel like you profited from watching the channel. That's my goal. And so that's what I aim to do. Hope your time is well spent. I believe my time is well spent because I enjoy y'all's, I've enjoyed getting to know y'all. I enjoy the fellowship that this channel has presented. And y'all are a pretty cool group. And I'm grateful for that.
So I'm trying to say hey and bye. But the dogs are barking like lunatics.
Well, y'all, thank you very much. We do appreciate you being with us tonight. For those on the replay crew, appreciate you just as much, and hope to see you, live, at least on occasion. Y'all join us Saturday night. I don't know what I'll talk about. If y'all have some questions or comments, would love
I thought we were
to.
going to do the Bitcoin thing, the history.
Oh, yeah. I guess I need to write that down. History of Bitcoin. So if there's something else that y'all have that you'd like to see in addition to that, let me know. We love you guys. Hope y'all
Yes, we
have
do.
a great rest of the night, great rest of the week. And we'll look forward to seeing you Saturday, bright and early, 7:00 p.m.
Eastern.
Y'all, Eastern.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all go out and y'all be careful out there. Our time is up. We thank
See
you
you
for
Saturday.
yours. Good night, y'all.